On a foggy night in Northern California, shadows swallowed the edges of the Bay Area. Streets fell silent, lovers retreated to secluded lanes, and a creeping sense of unease spread through towns that had once felt safe. Then came the gunfire. Then came the screams, and from that night forward, a faceless phantom stepped into history. He called himself the Zodiac. He taunted police, terrified communities, and carved his legend with bullets, knives, and cryptic puzzles that remain unsolved to this very day. More than half a century later, his name still sparks fear, fascination, and endless debate. It began in December of 1968. On a dark stretch of Lake Herman Road near Berryessa, teenagers David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen parked their car on a quiet lover's lane. What should have been an ordinary night for two young people ended in blood. A mysterious attacker approached their vehicle, fired relentlessly, and left them dead with no clear motive. There were no witnesses, no answers, only shock that would ripple across California. The following summer, on the 4th of July in 1969, the killer struck again, this time at Blue Rock Springs near Vallejo. Darlene Ferrin, just 22 years old, sat in her car with her friend Michael Mageau when sudden flashes of gunfire tore through the night. Darlene was shot 9 times and died at the scene. Mageau, riddled with bullets, miraculously survived. The attack was savage, precise, and once again without warning. The message was clear: nowhere was safe, and anyone could be next. 2 months later, the killer's cruelty reached new heights. At Lake Berryessa in Napa County, college students Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard were enjoying a peaceful afternoon by the water. Suddenly, a hooded figure appeared, his costume marked with a strange crosshair symbol. He carried a gun, rope, and a knife. The couple was bound, helpless. Then, in a frenzy of violence, they were stabbed again and again. Hartnell survived his wounds. Shepard did not. On the door of their car, the killer left a chilling signature, the crosshair and the dates of his crimes. Only weeks later, in the bustling streets of San Francisco, the killer struck again. A taxi driver named Paul Stine picked up what he thought was an ordinary fare in Presidio Heights. But when the car stopped, the passenger pulled out a gun and executed him with a shot to the head. In a brazen move, the killer tore away a piece of Stine's bloody shirt and later mailed it to a newspaper as proof. By now, he was no longer just a murderer. He was a phantom who wanted recognition, he wanted control, and he was about to make sure the world knew his name. The Zodiac began sending letters, dozens of them, cryptic, mocking, filled with spelling errors and sinister humor. He demanded they be published on the front pages of newspapers, threatening to kill school children if they were ignored. His words dripped with arrogance. He called police slaves in his game. He promised more blood. He even bragged about collecting slaves for the afterlife. Alongside his rants, he sent ciphers, coded puzzles that experts, detectives, and even amateur enthusiasts spent decades trying to crack. One cipher, a 408-character puzzle, was solved within days by a schoolteacher and his wife. It revealed not his name, but a twisted manifesto boasting about the thrill of killing. Another cipher, 340 characters long, baffled investigators for 50 years until finally being cracked in 2020. Even then, the message contained no name, no identity, only more taunts. 2 other shorter ciphers, 13 and 32 characters long, remain unsolved to this day, shrouded in mystery, perhaps impossible to decode. The Zodiac symbol, the crosshair, appeared everywhere, scrawled on letters, carved into his costume, even used to mark the doors of his victims' cars. It was his brand, his signature, his way of turning murder into theater. Each new communication made headlines, turning him into a terrifying celebrity. Unlike other killers who hid in silence, the Zodiac demanded the spotlight, and the world couldn't look away. Communities lived in fear. Parents forbade their children from going out after dark. Couples avoided quiet lanes. The Bay Area felt like a city under siege, each night haunted by the thought that the hooded figure with a gun and a knife might be waiting in the shadows. The San Francisco Chronicle published his letters. The police scrambled to decode his threats. The people whispered his name with dread. And through it all, the Zodiac seemed to grow stronger, feeding on the fear he created. Suspects began to pile up. Arthur Leigh Allen, a disgraced teacher and convicted offender, seemed to match many of the details. He lived near the crime scenes. He owned a Zodiac brand watch, stamped with the same crosshair logo the killer used. A friend even claimed Allen had boasted about wanting to call himself Zodiac. But when police compared his handwriting and fingerprints, they didn't match. DNA evidence was inconclusive. Allen died in 1992, and no definitive proof ever tied him to the killings. Other names surfaced over the decades. Paul Dorr, a writer with strange, bomb-making knowledge. Gary Poste, whose acquaintances later suspected him. Earl Van Best Jr., linked by his own son in a shocking book. Each time, evidence seemed compelling. Each time, it slipped away. With more than 2,500 suspects investigated, not one has ever been proven to be the Zodiac. And so, the mystery grew. Witnesses gave conflicting descriptions. The ciphers revealed no real identity. The killer himself boasted of 37 victims, though only 7 can be confirmed. He thrived in the space between fact and fiction, half real and half myth, keeping police, journalists, and the public chasing shadows. The Zodiac was not just a murderer, he was a puppeteer, pulling the strings of fear, laughing as entire cities trembled. He transformed himself into a villain, larger than life, part criminal, part legend, part puzzle that refused to be solved. And with every unsolved clue, with every unanswered letter, he ensured that his ghost would linger, haunting America long after his final attack. The Zodiac case did not end with his letters. In truth, the deeper investigators dug, the stranger and darker the mystery became. The killer seemed to vanish as suddenly as he had appeared, but the fear he left behind never faded. Instead, it grew, fed by rumors, theories, and the endless hunt for the truth. Police searched for him across the Bay Area. Thousands of tips poured in. More than 2,500 suspects were investigated, each name adding a new twist to the story. Yet every time they thought they had the answer, the evidence slipped through their fingers. The Zodiac was a phantom, always one step ahead, and his shadow continued to loom over Northern California. Arthur Leigh Allen remained the prime suspect for years. He was a troubled man, dismissed from teaching for disturbing behavior, arrested for crimes that made him an easy target for suspicion. His life circled around Vallejo, close to where several attacks took place. He owned weapons, and he owned a Zodiac brand watch marked with the same crosshair symbol used by the killer. His friends recalled chilling conversations where Allen fantasized about hunting people. Yet when tested against the facts, the case fell apart. His handwriting did not match the Zodiac letters. His fingerprints and palm prints failed to align with those left behind. Decades later, DNA comparisons also ruled him out. When Allen died in 1992, he took with him the suspicions of an entire generation, but no proof that he was the monster everyone feared. Other suspects emerged, each surrounded by their own shadows. Paul Dorr, a quiet man with an interest in pulp magazines and bomb designs, was suggested by researchers who saw eerie similarities between his writings and the Zodiac's cryptic letters. Gary Francis Poste was named by a group of investigators who claimed his name could be teased out of the killer S ciphers and that his boot prints matched those left at a crime scene. Earl Van Best Jr. was accused by his own son, who believed his father's handwriting and fingerprints tied him to the case. Dozens more names floated in the air, from local men with violent pasts to wild claims involving celebrities and cult leaders. But with every new theory came the same dead end: no conclusive evidence, no confession, and no closure. The physical evidence itself seemed to conspire against investigators. A bloody fingerprint lifted from a crime scene never matched any suspect. DNA samples taken from the stamps on the Zodiac's letters were too weak, too partial, and possibly even contaminated. Witness descriptions were inconsistent, painting portraits of different men, none of them matching perfectly. The very puzzles the Zodiac sent, the ciphers that promised answers, only deepened the fog. The solved ciphers revealed twisted philosophies about killing and the afterlife, but not a name. The unsolved ones remained taunts, short and almost impossible to decode. It was as if the killer wanted to remind everyone that he was smarter than them, that the game would never end on their terms. As the years turned to decades, the Zodiac shifted from a real and present threat to a legend. A story whispered in classrooms, retold in true crime books, and reimagined on the silver screen. Films like Dirty Harry in 1971 drew inspiration from his crimes, creating villains modeled after him. Decades later, David Fincher's Zodiac brought the case to a new generation, turning the unsolved mystery into a cinematic masterpiece. Writers published book after book, each claiming to have uncovered the real identity of the killer, each fueling the fire of speculation. Television documentaries dissected every letter, every sketch, every theory. Podcasts obsessed over the smallest details, keeping the conversation alive long after the murders had ended. But for the families of the victims, the case was never just entertainment. For them, the Zodiac was not a legend. He was the faceless man who took away their children, their siblings, their friends. David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen never got to graduate high school. Darlene Ferrin's daughter grew up without her mother. Cecilia Shepard's loved ones never saw her bright future unfold. Paul Stine's murder turned a working man's final taxi fare into a national nightmare. Their families carried wounds that never healed, while the killer walked free, mocking them from the shadows. The psychological impact on the Bay Area was immense. For years, people locked their doors earlier, avoided lonely roads, and looked over their shoulders in fear. The idea that a man could appear at random, kill without reason, and then disappear again haunted everyone. The Zodiac did not just take lives, he robbed communities of their sense of safety, and when his letters spoke of school buses being blown up, of children being targets, the fear reached its peak. Parents gripped their kids tighter, strangers avoided eye contact. The Bay Area was never the same. Modern technology promised hope. In 2020, experts finally cracked the infamous Z340 cipher after 51 years, using sophisticated software and teamwork across continents. But the result was another cruel joke from the killer, more taunts without a name. DNA testing on letters offered possibilities, but contamination and uncertainty left investigators stuck. Genetic genealogy, the same tool that caught the Golden State Killer, could one day unlock the Zodiac's identity if usable DNA can be found. But until then, the answer remains locked away, hidden in the past. What makes the Zodiac case so powerful is not just the murders themselves, but the fact that he became larger than life. He was not just a man with a gun. He was a puzzle. A villain who craved attention, who wanted to be remembered, and who succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. More than 50 years later, his symbol still chills those who see it. His letters still spark debate. His crimes still inspire films, shows, and endless speculation. He achieved exactly what he wanted: immortality through fear. And so the question endures. Who was the Zodiac Killer? Was it Allen, Dorr, Poste, Van Best, or someone whose name we have never spoken? Did he die quietly, his secret never exposed, or is his identity hidden in plain sight, buried in the evidence that has yet to be properly uncovered? Until that day comes, the Zodiac remains a ghost that walks through American history, a faceless shadow who reminds us that some mysteries are never solved and some monsters are never unmasked.